Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. This is, what should we call this, Adam? The episode, the little episode that could, because Adam and I have been tremendously derailed at like just the universe conspiring against us from recording today. And I haven't told Adam this yet because I didn't want him to be nervous, but this is actually my 100th episode
Wow, congratulations.
of my podcast. Yes. And I felt that Herzog was worthy of such a title.
That's
So,
great.
yeah, here we are, 100 episodes later. I started this, I think September 1st, 2022 was my first episode release with Frank. And now here we are. It's
That's
amazing.
brilliant. Well, I'm honored, as I'm sure Werner is.
Oh,
So yeah,
yes,
I
of
think we
course.
should refer to this as the podcast that dragged a ship over a mountain.
Yes. Yes, it has been like I had the flu. We had technical difficulties. We had to reschedule a couple of times. Not to mention that we had actually like been planning this for over a month as well, in addition to all the reschedules. So you're right.
Oh
It is
yeah.
very Fitzcarraldo.
Well, we started talking about this when you first started the PROVOCAUTEUR series. So
Yes,
yeah, it's been a really long time. Yeah,
that was like 14 episodes ago or something like that.
there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've done
I
many
think is
directors
it
since.
something like six months or so ago that you started that.
Yeah, it's got to be because I've done more films for that series than I have any other series easily.
For
But it
sure.
was nice that I actually enjoyed a lot of the Herzogs. I hadn't seen very many prior to you assigning them, but I now feel indoctrinated.
I'm really delighted because I really wasn't too sure. He is one of those filmmakers that a lot of people have a strong attachment to. I certainly do. Um, but he's got such an extensive filmography, and there is so much in there. There's a lot of diversity. He's the kind of filmmaker I think that some of it might work for you better than others because there's I guess there's such a volume. And well, so to go to, I guess, back to the provocateur theme or idea, when you and I first started chatting about it, I sort of misunderstood what your intention with this series was. And I started talking to you about all of these, what I was terming edgelord film directors. I was like, oh, are you doing, the cinema's bad boys who are like pushing the envelope and putting you in uncomfortable situations, all the rest of it. And then you explained to me, no, that's not what it's about. And we were talking about who would, who would fit. And I think Herzog, I don't necessarily see him as a provocateur or a provocateur, um, but certainly I think he fits with the provocateur. Definitely there's an auteurist reading that you can have of his work, and we'll get into that and all that it entails. Um, but I actually like to think of him more as an evocateur. I think
Interesting.
he's trying to evoke. So I think he's constantly searching for the sublime and searching for ways in which you can find a language outside of understanding, and that evokes something spiritual or something within the viewer that reaches for some level that's beyond explanation. And I think it's the beyond explanation that he really latches onto.
Yeah, and I think a lot of his films, it feels like he's like an alien that comes to Earth and is like commenting on what he finds. You know, he doesn't necessarily seem to think like a normal human person, and so it's almost like you get this it like you're looking at America or you're looking at a different country, but it's not the same way that you feel that you would look at it, you know? And it's very interesting in that regard where he just seems otherworldly, not just his narration, but his entire perspective seems like it's from a different planet studying ours.
Well, it's interesting that you mention alien understandings of humans, Amy. This is probably the best opportunity for me to launch into. I promise I will only do this once, but I do have a Herzog impression.
Oh,
I have
yes.
I have a quote here. I don't know. I feel like it's probably written into the bylaws of like film podcasting, clause 67B. If you're doing a podcast about Werner Herzog, you've got to at least do
An
one
attempt.
impression.
Yes.
So, all right, here we go. You ready?
I am.
I have dwelt among the humans. Their entire culture is built around their penises. It's funny to say they are small. It's funny to say they are big. I have been at parties where humans have held bottles, pencils, thermoses in front of themselves and called out, "Hey, look at me. I'm Mr. So-and-so Dick. I've got such and such for a penis." I never saw it fail to get a laugh. So,
Wow, Adam.
so
Please.
that's
That
Werner
is
Herzog
incredible.
as I have been practicing.
That's
That is
great.
Werner Herzog as he appeared in Rick and Morty. Say what you want about Rick and Morty. Some people love it, some people hate it.
I love
Divisive.
it.
Maybe like Werner Herzog, perhaps.
Yeah.
But he plays an alien, and that's his take. And I just, to me, that just really kind of nails so much of what Herzog is about. It's this outsider's view and this sort of fascination, but also this kind of contemptible. It's a fascination that so often can turn on a dime from being loving and humanistic to being kind of contemptible and cynical. I'm thinking of the footage from the Les Blanc documentary of him filming Fitzcarraldo, where he's talking about, the birds in the jungle. They don't. It's not bird song. They're screaming. They're screaming in agony and pain. And it's that whole Herzogian cliche, I suppose, of the existential malaise. Sometimes it even goes darker than malaise. In the sense,
it's like the indifference of nature, almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The indifference of the universe.
Absolutely. Probably worth mentioning. I did discuss this with you that at age 14, Herzog converted to Catholicism very briefly, and it just didn't work for him for whatever reason. And I think his fundamental worldview, in having sort of left that behind, has become one of, if there is a God, and he does often refer to one, he's often referring to spirituality in his films, and even in there are so many interviews out there of him talking, so it's easy to get examples if you want to, hone your Werner Herzog impression. I listened to his entire memoir in audiobook form as well, so
Yeah.
I have like 12 hours worth of Herzog just kind of bleeding into my brain, washing over me. But yeah, this idea of an uncaring God or an indifferent God, or a universe that is without the best way to put it is that his memoir is called Every Man for Himself and God Against All. I think that summarizes that worldview perfectly. But what's fascinating, that would be all well and good if his films didn't have these incredibly beautiful human moments, right?
Yes, and I really think of Grizzly Man as sort of the embodiment of what you're saying, because there's such a contrast between the human person and that humanist view of like, he loves the bears and he wants to preserve them and he's there to protect them, and there's this very strong, albeit somewhat like delusional, mentally ill person, but still Treadwell is very loving in his own way, contrasted against that part where he's like, I see the cruel eyes of the bear, where he just is like, for me, I see nothing. I don't see love. I don't see companionship. I don't see any sort of understanding that Treadwell is talking about. So it does, I think that movie, more than any of the other ones, gives a really nice, neat dichotomy between those two views.
I think Grizzly Man does almost everything that Herzog does as a filmmaker in one film.
So do I.
Almost. There's
Right.
that meta element. He becomes part of it. And he was somewhat reticent to, when he first started making documentary films, and he was being funded by like German TV to make these half hour to 40-minute documentary shorts. They stipulated that he had to appear in them as a narrator, and he was very, very reticent. Initially, this is early 70s, but he did it, and it sort of gained momentum. And after a while, it was perhaps part of him finding his voice, that he actually found that if his own voice was part of the film that he was making, that was a mechanism for him to be able to explore those ideas in a way that made greater sense. And that meta aspect of Herzog's commentary always being sort of looming over the top of what you're saying, creating an additional layer.
Do you feel like the memoir like illuminated anything for you as far as like where his deepest passion is? Like, after you heard the memoir, did you get a sense of him? Like, do you feel like you know him better or know what it was that was driving him? Or like, that's what I'm curious about. Like, how would what does he think about himself and his own, like, what is it that's compelling him forward? Is it just curiosity? Is he in search for something specific? Did you get a sense of that at all?
There's a couple of things I'll say to that. One of them is this. There's another video out there of Herzog rejecting psychoanalysis, and he's cynical of psychoanalysis, and he suggests that he uses the metaphor of a fully illuminated house. He says, a house that is fully illuminated is uninhabitable, and a person is the same. If you light every corner, then you can no longer live there. It's no longer functional, and that's a beautiful metaphor in the sense that obviously I think he likes shadows, so he likes darkness, but I think
Mystery.
He also likes ambiguity. So there's that. Look, but at the same time, he is a great storyteller, and he likes to tell stories, and I think he likes to tell stories about himself. He's this contempt for psychoanalysis maybe is in the sense that he doesn't want to pursue a deeper analysis of his work other than what's there. He's instinctual,
Like
or
David Lynch.
instinctive.
Sounds like David Lynch.
He often refers to himself as an autodidact, so he's very suspicious of institutions. So film school, for example, he'll very proudly proclaim that he never set foot inside a film school, that he taught himself to make films, and he's very proud of that, and he's got this strong individualist take on things, and there's definitely a deep suspicion of social and hierarchical structures, and that comes through in lots of his films. Strawcheck through to Bad Lieutenant. I mean, the way that Aguirre, absolutely,
Aguirre.
It's right through, and so this fierce independence, I suppose, has always been part of what he's about, but he also has such a, I don't know, I mean, coming back to that idea of this contempt for psychoanalysis and not wanting to overanalyze, wanting the work, I guess, to speak for itself, and for that instinctual or that evocative approach to things, that search for the sublime. So, trying to find these remarkable, indescribable moments that speak to some kind of greater truth. maybe this is a good point at which to bring in his notion of ecstatic truth, which, reading some notes here, he defined in an interview with Roger Ebert in 1999, which he called the Minnesota Declaration. So just a couple of quotes on his stance about documentary filmmaking and specifically cinema verite. So he says the so-called cinema verite is devoid of verite. It reaches a merely superficial truth, the truth of accountants. Cinema verite confounds fact and truth and thus plows only stones, and yet facts sometimes have a strange and bizarre power that makes their inherent truth seem unbelievable. Fact creates norms, and truth illumination. There are deeper strata of truth in cinema, and there is such a thing as poetic ecstatic truth. It is mysterious and elusive, and can be reached only through fabrication and imagination and stylization.
This is what you just said is so family romance. Like,
sure,
that is like the bit about that you reach truth through fabrication. He is absolutely showing that in Family Romance LLC, where it's a completely manufactured situation, but there are layers of reality embedded in it so that the structure itself actually facilitates the truth happening in a way that couldn't if we just pointed the camera and not made the setup, right?
Yeah,
so
for sure. Yeah, so for those who haven't seen it, it's the basic premise is it's a Japanese company that will provide a stand-in for a family member for you to who you cannot communicate with, or they might have passed away, or for whatever reason. So you can recreate or create new life events with that person. And yeah, there's a beautiful. I mean, yes, it's a metatextual Herzog looking at himself, and I feel like because it's his final, as yet, it's his most recent fiction film. I definitely see him looking back over a career at that particular point and thinking about what is important to him. But at the same time, he's still always looking forward. He's always fascinated by new ideas. And so one of the images that really stands out for me in Family Romance is because he shot it himself. He was his own cinematographer. He spends a good couple of minutes focusing on the robotic fish. Yeah. These robotic fish just swimming around in aquariums, and you can almost see the cogs turning, with him behind the camera, just kind of going, isn't this remarkable and grotesque? Isn't this, somehow beautiful and yet devoid of life?
This is literally like, not to make a joke out of it, but this is literally what he did with Grogu on the Mandalorian set, where he was so obsessed with the puppet and the way that it was done, kind of hilariously, intrigued by it. But yeah, you're right. That curiosity that he has towards like technology and what they can do in the future and how that impacts connection, especially, or, what it is that does to our perception. Yeah. Because it's very clearly artifice, but it's in an environment where we're supposed to look at it as real.
Absolutely. And I think he doesn't do that in Family Romance because it is a fiction film, but in doing that in so many of his documentary films, there's that added layer of, you see the filmmaker coming to terms with the ideas and his own perspective. When you were asking me before about did I feel as though I had a better sense of him after having listened to 12 hours of his memoir, I didn't necessarily. Because I didn't feel as though it was a conversation. It wasn't that suspicion of psychoanalysis. It wasn't an outpouring of the soul. It was let me tell you some stories about my life that I think illustrate some points that are interesting or relevant, or let me tell you what I want you to know. There are obviously other personal truths to the man that you don't see in his films. What you do see in his films is him grappling with ideas that intrigue him,
Right.
following ideas that are interesting to him.
Well, I
But
think
that,
what's go ahead. Go ahead.
well, just to go back to this notion of artifice
Mm.
and fact norms, truth illumination, and it can only be reached through fabrication, imagination, and stylization. The other example that is maybe the other side of the coin, maybe in an ethical sense, is Land of Silence and Darkness as one particular example, right? So, again, for those who haven't seen it, it's a film about uh, deaf-blind people who, yeah, basically have lived a certain time, amount of their lives without language or sound of any kind, and some, like the Finney, who's the sort of the protagonist of the film, has managed to actually transcend that situation and live a very fulfilling life and help other people. And then you see others who have that, children mostly, and it's just, I mean, it's absolutely utterly heartbreaking, seeing these people that have no concept of the world as we know it, because they have no way of gauging it at all. So there were certain sequences in that film that Herzog manufactured, and yeah, I think it raises a really interesting ethical query around, what are the limits of documentary. If he's So, for example, there's a sequence where there's a birthday party. I think it's Finney's birthday party, and there are a number of her friends who are, yeah, fellow deafblind people who are reading and having translated for them poems. Now, that to me, there's a bit of a cruelty in the sense that Herzog's setting up this. Again, it's this sort of meta comment on what's going on here. Or isn't it Isn't it interesting that we have people who have no language, and we're creating this context whereby they are creating this extension through language that's all it's commenting on itself, and there's layers to it, which I don't know. I think that, to me, I'm a little sour on it. There
Yeah,
are
well,
other.
they're also asking about what it feels like to be deaf and blind. In the one of the poems is about what it feels like, right? So it's not
Mhm.
all. It's not only just random poems. They're also trying to
Sure.
express in words what they feel. But continue, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess I that notion of what are the limits of documentary? How much should a filmmaker interfere? There's another really famous moment in Grizzly Man where Herzog listens to the recording of Treadwell's death and tells his life partner, friend,
Partner.
whatever, yeah, never to listen to it. And that, to me, whilst it's an incredibly um, powerful moment, it's also kind of performative on Herzog's part. He is playing the part of the humanist filmmaker who wants to spare this woman. I mean, it was his choice to include that, A, to record it, but B, to include it. He could have made mention of it. And there is this, he's definitely interested in the hero's journey and inverting that in certain ways. The Kinski films are great examples, I guess, of him subverting these supposedly heroic or great men, or men that are trying to grapple with the world in ways that are unimaginable, doing the unimaginable and conquering things. And obviously, there's a colonialist lens that you can put on a lot of that, but then you can also sort of flip that onto Herzog's ethnographic approach to filmmaking too. He was famously the only filmmaker to have made a film on every continent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether he still is or not. but that, you know, that
I'm
he,
sure no one's gone to Antarctica like he has. That's actually
yeah.
besides. I love Strosek. How do you say that?
I
Is
say
that right?
Stroshek, because
Strosek.
that's how they
Strosek.
pronounce. That's how
Okay.
they pronounce it in the film. But yeah, I mean,
That one I love that one. I loved Nosferatu, the vampire, and I love the Antarctica, the end of the
Encounters at the End of the World. Yeah.
encounters at the end of the world.
Hmm.
But I would definitely like there's clear distinctions between these things, like Fata Morgana and Lessons of Darkness. There's certain ones where I'm like, okay, this is what Herzog is interested in, like destruction, or he's interested in mirages, or just like setting a camera down and looking at like things in the natural world. And then his narratives are very different. So it was interesting going back and forth. It was interesting that you assigned some of those to me so that I could go back and forth between those things, because otherwise I think if it had been only narratives, it would have felt completely different and I would have missed an entire side of him.
Yeah, and I mean, there's 5 films that he did with Kinski, and you can take those Kinski films as kind of their own little kind of mini canon in a way. He did only two with Bruno S, who was the star of Stroshek,
And
which I
Caspar
see,
Hauser.
and Caspar Hauser,
Yeah.
and yeah, what I find fascinating, because I watched a lot of Herzog, and I watched a bunch that I obviously didn't request that you watch, and some of the later ones where he's clearly, I mean, for the first part of his career, he was very much in opposition to the Hollywood studio system. Then he moves to LA and he sort of becomes absorbed into it, but he's still at a distance. He's cynical of it. He's flirting with it. It was really interesting watching Rescue Dawn, which is the one with Christian Bale, where he's very early in the Vietnam War. He's POW, POW camp,
Right.
and the themes and the ideas are all Herzogian. It's people grappling with extremes put in extreme circumstances. It's outsiders and oddballs and weirdos dealing with extraordinary situations, grappling with nature. All of those things are present, and yet stylistically, it's got this big sweeping score, and the cinematography is very kind of locked down and very widescreen. It's the editing and the way the story plays itself out is very traditional. It was quite a shock, actually. And I wondered whether it was a, one for me, one for them situation in Herzog sort of ingratiating himself into Hollywood. But it never really worked out, because none of the films that he really made in the American studio system were ever successful. He was always far too idiosyncratic in terms of the stories that he wanted to tell, I think, and the approaches that he was taking to storytelling.
Would you say that about Bad Lieutenant as well?
Because
yeah,
I see that film as a satire.
Mm.
I mean, there are other satirical films made from within the system, certainly, but actually, maybe that's an exception. I think that film did fairly well.
I was about to say, yeah, and then it's certainly amongst like cinephiles, people love it. But I mean, part of that is Nick Cage, but then it also is it is a very fascinating movie. It's very entertaining. It's kind of mysterious in its own way and odd, and like you can't just completely solve it as to what it means. Yeah.
Shout out to Jerry and
Rob
and Joe, who talked about Bad Lieutenant not so long ago on the Caliber 9 podcast.
Yeah.
And what they were saying, which I completely agree with, is that so Herzog didn't write the story; someone else wrote the story or the screenplay, and this is Herzog working out someone else's story and finding ways of inserting his own interests or ideas, I mean, the iguana cam and the his soul is still dancing. You know, those to me are peak Herzog moments injected into a story that is otherwise, yeah, not the kind of thing that he would ordinarily be particularly interested in. But I do, in that film, find the suspicion of institutions definitely
Yeah.
carries through for sure. Yeah.
And the kind of like oblivion of like that Nick Cage's character is, I wouldn't say he's actually searching because he's not really cognizant most of the time, but he's clearly like not happy and not fulfilled, and there's something that's like out of reach
Absolutely.
that he just can't get. Yeah.
He's outside of himself. He's and it's a character in an extreme situation, in an extraordinary circumstance, and that makes it Herzogian as well, for sure. Yeah,
right. Like Fitzcarraldo, where the person's just in an insanely, like, I don't know, almost like the elements are against you way of being alone.
Yeah, no one, nothing in the universe, no person or God or nature wants you to achieve this thing.
Right.
Everything is against you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when they do, it's kind of like, oh, okay, who cares? I mean, that's the saddest thing for Fitzcarraldo to me is that at the end, like, you sit there for so long and you're watching this thing happen, and it's like, can he do it? Can he do it? Okay, yes, he can. And then you're like, so what? I mean, it really is kind of like it's such a letdown at the end of like, he's happy, it seems like, but like, at what cost was this done? I mean, it doesn't even feel triumphant to me necessarily because it just seems meaningless. Maybe that's the point.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you'd said that in a Werner Herzog accent, I would have believed it to be a genuine quote.
Yeah.
Look, and again, Fitzcarraldo to me feels like the kind of quintessential meta Herzog film because his own experiences creating it, of making it, mirrors everything, and he in so many interviews, he continually will go back to, he always referencing, I pulled a boat over a mountain. Like, I did it. I Werner Herzog, pulled a boat over a mountain. We actually did it. We could have dismantled the boat and done it bit by bit. There are ways that we could have done this in filmmaking, movie magic. We could have used some special effects, or we could have logistically worked it so that it was not as difficult, but it was that important to him as a filmmaker to literally take the entire boat over the mountain so that his experience was mirroring that of his film protagonist.
Right, but I mean, aren't you kind of like, so what, Herzog? Like, what? This doesn't mean anything, honey.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, you could have made it easier on yourself, mate.
No, but also like, so what? You did it. Like, I just don't. I guess I just don't understand. Yeah, it doesn't help anyone. It isn't useful. It didn't accomplish anything. It's just like you did this dumb thing so that you could say that you did it forever. Congratulations. Nobody sort of like dared you that you couldn't, and no one else is trying to do that. So it's a very weird thing for me to be. It's like being excited about something where everyone's like, okay, I guess, good job.
I come back to the search for the sublime because pulling a boat over a mountain that's a sublime, that's an unexplainable, you could say miracle, or that's it's an extraordinary thing, right? And so in pursuing those moments or those ideas or those images, because he is always chasing these images that have this resonance, this greater resonance to something, and he has also said pulling a boat over a mountain was a great metaphor, but a metaphor for what, I don't know.
For what? And also, he didn't do it himself, though, Adam. I mean, we also understand that, like, this isn't like Kobe Bryant or LeBron James or something where the person's like, I did it. he did not do it. He like made it happen, and it took a lot of people, and there was a lot involved, like logistically. So it's not even like an athlete or, someone who reaches something on their own. He did not do it like in those terms either. He just like made people do it in such a way that it actually worked.
Yeah, but his and just to play devil's advocate, because I'm with, I'm with you on this. But we're always going to talk about Werner Herzog having done it, right? Like who are the other people, right? He's got that auteurist stamp on pulling a boat over a mountain.
Yeah, but Adam, just because something can be done, should it be done? Does it need to
you could say that about his entire career, Amy.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple in there where there's a should. Like, I do think that The Land of Silence and Darkness was worth doing. It calls attention to something, and he has films that are empathy building, and give you a sort of sensitivity or an awareness of something that you otherwise would not have. I felt like after that movie, I didn't want to complain about anything for the rest of my life, and I was just like very moved by it. And it's also just the kindness and the gentleness displayed that she has, and just like you said, the heartbreaking nature of the situation itself is just like, I don't know that kind of loneliness and that kind of isolation, and never will probably, because it's so focused on that situation. But I do think that was a productive, not that all movies need to be, but I just feel like, I don't know, I tend to gravitate more towards the meaningful ones.
The humanist ones, perhaps?
Yeah.
And I think there's that push and pull constantly in his career between humanism and the forceful pursuit of the individual. So, the Kinski films are mostly about these passionate individuals doing remarkable things, but then there are other deeply humanist works. Stroszek and Land of Silence and Darkness are two of them. Grizzly Man is another one. So there's a quote that I wanted to read about Bruno S. The star of Stroszek. He says, in all my films, that film wouldn't exist without Bruno's.
His tenderness and
his performance and who he was as a person, bringing that to the performance. Difficult to know, and this is another sort of ethical, murky area. Difficult to know how much of that is a performance and how much of that is just that guy. And Herzog said that, for example, on set, they had to put up with hours and hours of just letting Bruno talk until he was comfortable enough to then let the cameras roll. And I also read that Bruno it's possible that there was some kind of disability or impairment there. He had been, the story goes, he was dropped on his head as a baby. I know that's a cliche that people sort of trot out, but it was a story that Bruno always told about himself. And he's so raw and unfiltered. And I believe he was quite uncomfortable, grappled somewhat with the vulnerability that he had put on screen in Herzog's films afterwards. I think he came to terms with it later in his life, but it's so incredibly raw. It's undeniable. So Herzog says, in all my films and with all great actors with whom I have worked, Bruno was the best. There is no one who comes close to him. In his humanity and the depth of his performance, there's no one like him. He's worked with incredible actors. He kept coming back to Kinski, and Kinski's performances are wildly theatrical and incredible. And Cage is amazing, and there are lots. Michael Shannon he used a number of times, and he's elicited some really fantastic performances. But to me, there's nothing like Bruno, nothing else like Bruno, and I think it's because Bruno is the purest distillation of Herzog's humanist tendencies.
I agree completely. Yes. And you almost feel bad watching it. It's
And
almost
yeah,
like that scene in Taxi Driver where Scorsese pulls the camera away because it's like it's too vulnerable and too
right.
precious, and we can't watch this.
Mm,
Like we don't want to watch Travis's pain
yeah.
on the phone call. It's like that, and you also have, because of the cultural nature of it, and that he's just dropped into a place where he can't even speak the language. You know that everything's about to be taken away from him, and he doesn't even understand. And there's, she just dumps him, and it's just one thing after the other of just like
Mm,
such sad reality, and you know that it's coming. The way that film is structured, you know it's coming,
mm.
and then it does, and it's tragic.
It really is.
Yeah, I was so moved by the whole end scene with the chicken dancing, and then him going up into the lift, and I had this like such a strong sense that he looked at those animals and felt that that was him, that's like put a quarter in and he'll play the accordion, and it's like,
Mm,
no, that's not you, like you are so much more than that. It's just that he's been abandoned, and I don't know. That movie really, really hit me hard.
yeah.
Nosferatu in kind of a similar way where, but in, I guess, a funny way where it's just like you said, immortality is sheer exhaustion, where it's just like, man, give these people a break,
Mm,
They're just so lonely and so sad, and just have no way home. So I think Herzog does that really well.
yeah, it's really fascinating to me that. So I watched Herzog's Nosferatu. Sorry, getting my consonants confused there, getting tongue tied.
Getting tongue
I
tied.
watched his Nosferatu at a reasonably close to watching
The Eggers.
Bram Stoker's
Oh,
Dracula, which to
yeah.
me they're the inverse of each other because Coppola's film is so horny and
Yes.
Herzog's film is the complete opposite.
Not at
It,
all. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't see Herzog as being particularly interested. That's why that quote that I started with at the beginning from Rick and Morty, uh, you know, oh, it's all about penises and all the rest of it. There's very little sex in Herzog's films. He's
Mm-hmm.
not particularly interested. I don't think he's particularly interested in sex or sexuality. I think again, there's this sort of he certainly not doesn't depict it very much, and when he does, it's in a pretty perfunctory narrative sense. It's like we need this to progress the narrative, and he's not really interested in sensuality
Not at all.
or sexuality.
Right.
Um, and I think that again, this kind of comes back to what you were saying about this alien view of humanity. He's kind of like, aren't humans weird? Like, isn't getting turned on kind of weird? What's with that? And it's almost like he's kind of keeping it at a distance. It's that he doesn't want to get too close to it. He wants to kind of just kind of refract it through these other ideas instead of like diving right into it the way Coppola's film does, for example.
Oh,
Coppola.
yeah. And actually, that was my favorite component of it, because I had just seen The Eggers and felt that this was such a more profound take on lust and seduction, and that it actually is pathetic and lonely and kind of like is there to harm you, as opposed to The Eggers. I think he tried to make it very sexy and very alluring, and like she's it's like the movie The Whip and the Body, where like it's like the person is struggling, whereas in Herzog's Nosferatu, she's not struggling at all. The only thing is that she has to die probably, but other than that, she's like, get away from me. Like there is just no, and I prefer that example to the other, because it just felt like a relief. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's just more interested in the the things that surround it than he is the sort of the I don't know. He's interested in the existential as opposed to the bodily, perhaps.
Hmm. Right. Yeah.
Um,
And maybe it's almost to his detriment in a way, because it's like there is that piece of the puzzle that we never see, right? Because Herzog is not interested, then there is this whole part of life that does not get
mm,
represented in his films.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that the existential ponderance is it's so memed now. It's
Yeah.
become such an in joke, such a cliche that I mean his public persona is so based around it that there was Rick and Morty, and then he was in Parks and Recreation, and he was in The
And The
Simpsons
Mandalorian.
twice, and The Mandalorian, and he's used in these. They're referencing. It's almost like in getting Werner Herzog to be in your film or your text, you are referencing Werner Herzog. You're trying to draw some of that Herzogian existential ponderance in, but it's so often been used for comedy. It's
Right.
it's a meme now.
Right.
It's become, and I feel like it's kind of at its apex in Grizzly Man. That quote that you mentioned of the cold eyes of the bear. I see no. I think I've actually got it here somewhere.
Yeah,
What haunts me?
Treadwell's. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, he says, I believe the common denominator of the universe is not harmony but chaos, hostility, and murder. What haunts me is that in all the faces of all the bears that Treadwell ever filmed, I discover no kinship, no understanding, no mercy. I see only the overwhelming indifference of nature.
Exactly.
And
I remember that distinctly.
Yeah, and I think it was almost like that was the jump the shark moment in a way, where I think he realized, okay, maybe that's enough. Maybe I need to just kind of not do, because he kind of stopped doing that so much in his own films. It became a little bit on the nose, and he was then being asked, "Oh, do you want to be in all of these TV shows doing a Werner Herzog, cold, dark, existential monologue?" And his own films, I think he stepped away from it a little bit. Even the documentaries that he made afterwards, there's a lighter touch in terms of how he discusses those themes. And particularly a fair bit later, he starts working with Clive Oppenheimer, who's, I think, a physicist. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but a British physicist. And so he made a couple of films with him about the nature of existence and like what more Herzogian theme is there, right? But they actually have a more a lighter, defter sort of touch to them. There's still that ponderance and that questioning, that inquisitiveness, but he's left some of that really on the nose, ponderous monologuing to the side, because I think he even maybe felt like it had become so part of it. I've got another quote here about that where he says, "My voice has found a great community of fans, which, combined with my view of life, asks to be imitated. I am a grateful victim of such satirists." So he's in on the joke.
So he knows. Yeah, he knows.
Of course he knows. Yeah.
When I watched a Q&A, he has an introduction to Family Romance LLC where he talks about that this is something that they do in Japan, and that a film student had brought it to his attention, and that he was very interested in doing it, and then has a Q&A at the end, and he just seems he really is genuinely interested in human interaction and in especially in authenticity. He kept saying that over and over, because he has the guy who has the business in Japan be the main character
Mm.
of the movie, which he was like, people watch this and they actually thought it was a documentary, and it's completely staged, and there's a script and everything. But he said that he did leave room for those moments where he wasn't sure what people were going to do or what they were going to say. And that's what he's really after. So he's just such a fascinating individual. I think that's why I resonate with him, because that's what I'm always looking for too in films, is where's the authentic moment? What's, there, you kind of toss around these words like real and artifice and authentic, and it becomes a little bit difficult to hone down. But I think what he's talking about is anything that is true, like anything that the person says or expresses that is true to them, that isn't put on, And so I think that's what he's ultimately seeking.
Yeah,
now.
ecstatic truth, right?
Right.
But he seeks that ecstatic truth both as a documentarian, where he is searching for moments, incredible, profound moments that are just, and he talks about it in Grizzly Man, where he's like, oh, I really connected with Treadwell as a filmmaker because he had a really great eye and a great knack for finding these incredible moments of authenticity. And you can find those, they're littered throughout Herzog's filmography. There are so many of them. These really great moments where the camera will just lock in on something and let it play out. And it speaks to this universal truth. But he is also as interested in finding that through artifice and finding it, it's that flip side, right?
Right.
He's interested in, so he does this thing. I think other filmmakers do it as well. Maybe it's been so long since I've seen one of Errol Morris's films.
Oh yeah,
and I know
he's
they
great.
were good. They were good friends.
Yeah. Yes.
Errol Morris finally made his first film, and that caused Werner Herzog to eat his own shoe. He bet Errol Morris that he wouldn't, if he finished the film, he would eat his own shoe. And so there's a film of that. Anyway, I think Errol Morris does it. Herzog definitely does it a number of times. He does it in Grizzly Man. There are a bunch of other documentaries where he does this. The most interesting to me is and I mean, if this isn't just a cash job, I don't know what is. But Werner Herzog directed a live concert for the Killers in Las Vegas in around about 2009-ish.
I used to love the Killers.
And he shot a little, and part of the like video intro before the concert film. And it's branded as like American Express Presents, so it's totally a cash job. Anyway, which, I mean, hey, like,
why not? You need some money.
Oh, sure. Yes, you can be the filmmaker who is, suspicious of and cynical about, institutions, but dollar's a dollar, right?
Right.
You gotta put food on your families, right? So he does this thing where he has the subject or the whoever it is that he's interested in at that particular moment stand dead on and just kind of look at the camera for an uncomfortable amount of time. Silently look at the camera for an uncomfortable amount of time. Just kind of stand there and stare. And he pushes it to the point where it becomes kind of absurd and it becomes deeply
like too far.
Awkward.
Yeah.
Too far in his pursuit of trying to find some, element of, truthfulness, ecstatic truth, right, in this artifice. Because, I mean, look, it's an artificial eye, right? It's not the camera is not someone that you're having a human interaction with. It's it's mediating. You're being mediated. By being filmed, you are being mediated. It's not lived reality. And so it's acknowledging that, it's locking into that, and it's pushing it to this kind of almost absurd level. And he does it in this little mini documentary where he takes the Killers to this little sort of like rundown kind of Western ranch. This artificial kind of ranch outside of Las Vegas, and they just kind of wander around and talk about things, and then they stand in front of this kind of shooting gallery, and they stand and they stare at the camera, and it's that thing you can see his subject become uncomfortable,
Right.
but he leaves it in. He's looking for that discomfort as part of this. It's almost like once you push this into the realm of, once you push it too far, once you've been staring at that camera for too long, that it's almost like a flick is switched, and
Yeah.
a switch is flicked, and
I feel like
yeah,
you switched.
yeah,
No, I, for some reason, you made me think of like Stop Making Sense, where it's the opposite, where Jonathan Demme's camera is like allowing us to see something, but none of the people in the concert are affected by it. Like part of the genius of that movie is that it's so vibrant and so full of life and so true to them that it's almost like the camera isn't even there.
mm-hmm.
I would prefer something like that, I think, as far as like that goes, because then it really does, it not only feels like you're there, but it feels like the people are not performing for the camera.
Mm-hmm.
They're just in the happiness of their music and of their creation. And David Byrne is so good in that, where it's just like you don't feel like he's putting on anything. It does feel,
other than
as
an
opposed
oversized suit.
Yes, it's so good.
But see, that's great.
Yeah.
I totally get you there. And there's this incredible, just ebullient, performative, just, and they're just musicians at the height of their game, and
Yes.
they're totally locked in, and it's
Yes.
joyous and it's amazing.
Yes.
Right. But it is a performance. Yes. Okay. But it's not this kind of faux authenticity of like, oh, well, we're a punk band in a scummy venue. Like, this is gritty authenticity.
Yeah, and it's not
like,
to the camera.
This is a show. We are putting on a show here. This show
Right.
is like, let me wear a giant oversized suit because it's kind of funny and weird and interesting, and it's part of the show, and it's that the artifice is on screen as opposed to behind it, in a sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But it doesn't feel, I don't know, it just doesn't feel manipulated in the way that what you're describing kind of seems so...
And this is, I think, one of my issues with Herzog. I think that this ecstatic truth that he is searching for, if I'm being, if I'm being cruel, I think it's kind of bullshit in a sense. I think that he wants his cake and eat. He wants to have his cake and eat it too, to a certain extent.
Right.
There's the ethical considerations around where is the line with documentary. How much discomfort can you put someone through, or how much can you take them out of a moment in order to try and engender something that you as a filmmaker feel is real.
Right.
And that to me is, so to bring this back to, this flip side of humanism versus provocation. When you and I first started talking about this series that you were doing, and I misunderstood, and I was like, oh yeah, edgelord film bro directors. One of the directors I mentioned, who I know is someone that you don't like, is Harmony Korine, who was heavily influenced by a couple of Herzog's films, namely Stroszek, but also Even Dwarfs started small. And I know you obviously didn't watch that one, and that was the one that I was the most worried about you hating. I thought you would hate it, because I think it is Herzog's most edgelord film. I'd almost call it, even Herzog started somewhere.
Yeah. I was about to say you could just invert it.
Some of his early short films that he made, in his teens and early 20s, do this as well. He's sort of getting his characters to kind of play dress ups, and there's this artifice in the sense that they are about, constructed reality. And Even Dwarfs Started Small is very much that. And we're given very, very little context as to what is actually happening in the film. But you could call it a colony or a prison camp, or it's some kind of institution where there are a number of little people, both as the oppressed and the oppressors, those in power, and there's this shift in power dynamics. And there is definitely a discomfort, I think, in the use of people of a different physical stature for potentially being used for the sake of grotesquerie. I do think that, which I think is something that you could maybe level at Harmony Korine in a certain sense, that pursuit of the grotesque, maybe for its own sake, is there. It's a lot, I think, follows through. I want to have a kinder approach to Herzog in that I think he was reaching for something, like in having all of the people be in the film be little people. I think he was trying to make a comment, and maybe it's not entirely successful because it doesn't necessarily overcome that discomfort that comes with the inherent, this provocative use of grotesquerie by using people who are have a different physical form to most of us. So it's such a puzzling one, because there are so many, I think, incredible images. He strikes upon these incredible images. It's the first use of the car running in a circle, which he reuses in Stroszek. I'm going to quote Canadian post-rock band Godspeed You Black Emperor here. The car is on fire and there's no driver at the wheel.
Oh,
and if you want to extend the metaphor even further, the lyric continues: "We are trapped in the belly of this horrible machine, and the machine is slowly bleeding to death." Now, you could say that in a Herzog accent, and no one, again, people would be like,
bat an eye.
Well, which film was that from? Right?
Yeah.
Interestingly, that image of the car, the revolving car, the engine running in the car, running in a circle with no driver, was something that he drew from his own life. And he does that a lot with images that he creates in films or tries to recreate in films. So when he was, I think, in his late teens, early 20s, he worked at Oktoberfest as almost like a valet parking. So people that came to Oktoberfest got too drunk, they would look after the cars. And I believe I might be getting the story wrong, but there was someone came back to their car, was too drunk, and they kind of had a little bit of fun with them by setting the car off on a loop and let them kind of run after it, which is kind of cruel, but also kind of hilarious. And there's that Herzogian dichotomy again, right?
Real life and
and real life bleeding in. But I think our friend Ethan made this point in his review of Land and Silence of Darkness, where he suggests that that's almost he's trying to correct for things that he did with Even Dwarves, in that he's trying to pursue that humanism and he's looking at disability in a different way. He's trying to find a more empathetic way of approaching it, that he maybe he's trying to it's a mea culpa of some kind,
reconcile it.
Yeah, trying to reconcile something that maybe he realizes wasn't totally on the level from an ethical perspective. But he keeps going back and forth the whole way through his career,
Well, Adam, we are almost out of time. I have one more question for you that I want you to share. If anyone listening has never seen a Herzog film, what would you want them to start with, or what would you recommend being as a good entry point into his filmography? And then I also want to know what your favorite one is.
Yeah. Those are both really, really difficult. Do you have an answer? having watched 10 plus, or you've seen a
I
bunch
think
now.
Grizzly Man is probably the one that would
Yeah,
be the easiest.
I think I'd probably go with that as well. I
Yeah,
think
I'd go with Grizzly Man.
it's the most representative of everything that he does.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then my favorite is Strostek, however
I
you say
think
it.
I think we're in
That's
in
your
lockstep there.
that's your cover photo right now, right? I saw the chicken. In
It was, but then
Yeah.
I had another 5-star watch, so it's no longer Strashek.
It's no longer R.I.P. But it
Yeah,
was.
it's all right.
The
It
chicken was there.
Chicken was there.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, that one is unforgettable, and I do have a special place in my heart for Bad Lieutenant, just because it's a good addiction movie. But I think Bruno really that caught me off guard too, because I had no idea what I was about to watch. So I'm glad that I didn't know anything ahead of time. Is there any parting quote that you want to leave us with, Adam, before we say ad vidasane?
I mean, look, if you'll allow it, Amy, there is someone who would actually like to sign off for us.
I would love that, please.
Is it possible? All right.
Yeah.
Here we go. How then, in an uncaring world, overseen by an indifferent God, can we hope to find genuine belonging and connection? The answer to me feels ineffable and yet elemental in its simplicity. Plainly put, Amy, I'll see you at the movies.
See you at the movies.